Hi, this is SAHOO. Welcome once again to my YouTube channel SAHOO's tutorial. In this YouTube video, I will discuss the complete summary of the novel Pride and Prejudice that was published in the year 1813, and its first title was First Impression. First Impressions. Okay, this is the magnum opus, the novel, the great novel written by Jane Austen, Pride and Prejudice. It was published in 1813. Okay, so in this class, we will learn the complete story of Pride and Prejudice using the mind map technique. It will be very helpful to remember the whole story using the mind map technique. Okay, where I will discuss some characters from the novel. Okay, so but before starting the session, I would like to request all of you, please do subscribe my channel SAHOO's tutorial and stay tuned with SAHOO's tutorial. Tap the bell icon to get more notifications about the video, and if you like the video, please do subscribe and share with your friends. So let's begin the first slide here. Look at here that Miss Elizabeth Bennet here. Okay, so Miss Elizabeth Bennet, the main female protagonist of the heroine. Okay, so who is the heroine of the novel? That is Elizabeth Bennet, who is the female protagonist, who is the heroine of the novel here, Miss Elizabeth Bennet, and her nickname is Lizzie, Lizzy. Okay, and she is having pride as well as prejudice. She is having pride as well as prejudice. Now, what is prejudice? That is preconception or presumption. That is when someone is making a kind of folly by judging any people by the first impression. Okay, that is prejudice. So she is having pride as well as prejudice, and after that she was drawn towards Darcy, then love, and at the end she married, follows with marriage. And whom? That is to Mr. Darcy, the male protagonist. So we got two characters, one is Elizabeth and other is Darcy. Elizabeth here, Elizabeth and Darcy. Okay, so Elizabeth and Darcy. Elizabeth is the the female heroine, and Darcy is the male hero, the main protagonists of the novel. Now come to next, that is Miss Jane Bennet, and she is the eldest daughter of Mr. and Mrs. Bennet's family. Jane Bennet, the elder sister, and very close and intimate with Elizabeth. Okay, very close and intimate with Elizabeth. So Miss Jane, she has fallen in love with Mr. Charles Bingley, which from north of England, Mr. Charles Bingley, and they have recently come to Netherfield Park. Then come to Netherfield Park. So Charles Bingley is from north of England, and here Miss Jane Bennet has fallen in love with Mr. Charles Bingley, and vice versa. Mr. Charles Bingley was also fallen in love with Jane Bennet, and Jane Bennet is the eldest daughter of the family, and she is very close and intimate with Elizabeth. Okay, now look at here that Mr. Charles Bingley. So we got one couple, one pair of couple, Elizabeth and Darcy. Another pair of couple is here, Jane plus Mr. Charles Bingley. I'm writing here Mr. Bingley. Okay, Mr. Bingley, Jane and Mr. Bingley. Now, Mrs. Bennet is the mother of 5 daughters, mother to 5 daughters, and married to Mr. Bennet. So we got the family of Bennet family here, Mr. Bennet, Mr. and Mrs. Bennet, who have 5 daughters. Who have 5 daughters. First one, the eldest one is Jane, after that Elizabeth. Okay, now Mr. Fitzwilliam Darcy, who is a friend of Charles Bingley. Now look at here, that Charles Bingley and Darcy, they are friends, and he is the male protagonist, and he is the pride of the title. Pride represents here the character Darcy. The male protagonist is Darcy here, who falls in love and eventually marries. Eventually, who falls in love with eventually Elizabeth. Okay, now here Mr. Charles Bingley's sister is Caroline Bingley. Mr. Charles Bingley's sister is Caroline Bingley. And Lydia. Now come to Lydia. Lydia is the youngest Bennet sister. The youngest Bennet sister, and who eloped with Wickham, the militia agent. The youngest Bennet sister, look at here, that is she eloped with Wickham, the militia agent, and she disgraces the Bennet family. The reputation was ruined due to her elopement with Wickham. So Lydia was the youngest Bennet sister, and Mr. William Collins is the cousin of Mr. Bennet, who will inherit the Longbourn estate, because Mr. and Mrs. Bennets have no male child. That's why Mr. William Collins will inherit the right heir of the property of the Longbourn estate is Mr. William Collins. And Charlotte Lucas here. Charlotte Lucas is the close friend of Elizabeth. So Elizabeth, and they are the neighbor of Bennet family. There is Lucas, and Charlotte Lucas is the eldest daughter of Lucas family, and Charlotte Lucas is very much attached to Elizabeth. They are best friends. Elizabeth and Charlotte are best friends. Lady Catherine de Bourgh. Lady Catherine de Bourgh is Darcy's aunt. Lady Catherine, who always interferes in the others' matter. Lady Catherine de Bourgh. And Mr. Wickham, who is a lieutenant in Meryton. Okay, family agent, and who will elope with Darcy. Who will elope with, and Mr. Wickham at the very beginning will inspire Elizabeth. Will inspire Elizabeth. Will attract okay, Elizabeth at the very beginning. That is Mr. Wickham or Georgia Wickham. Okay, now move to the next slide. So we got here now come to the Bennet family. Okay, I mentioned that Bennet family, Mr. and Mrs. Bennet, they have 5 daughters. Okay, they live in Hertfordshire county. So name of the county is Hertfordshire. Okay, where is the Longbourn estate? So they live at Longbourn estate. Name of the estate is Longbourn estate, and the county is Hertfordshire. So who live there? Mr. Bennet and Mrs. Bennet, and they have 5 daughters. Okay, now who are the daughters? Jane is the eldest one. Jane is the eldest, uh, who has a relationship with Charles Bingley. In the novel we will find that, okay, Charles Bingley and Jane will marry at the end. Now Elizabeth is the second daughter, whose name is Lizzie, and she will at last eventually accepts the proposal of Darcy. And Mary is the third daughter, who always dislikes the social events, dislikes social events. And Catherine and Lydia is the youngest. And Catherine's nickname is Kitty. So this is all about the Bennet family. Okay, now the 2 friends. Okay, 2 friends. Who are the 2 friends? 2 friends, that one is Charles Bingley, another is Darcy. Charles Bingley and Darcy. Okay, now a young single man, who is Charles Bingley, a young single man of large fortune from the north of England, and he has recently rented Netherfield Park. And so both Charles Bingley and Darcy, they have reached to Netherfield Park, and they are the friends. डार्सिच जो काउंटी का नाम है जहां पे रहता है, दैट इज डार्बीशायर, एंड नेम ऑफ द स्टेट ऑफ डार्सी इज पेम्बरली. Okay, so what was the state of Darcy? That is Pemberley State. Now where it is the Pemberley Estate is in Derbyshire County. And Charles Bingley, who is a young single man, is not married, is not married, okay, man of long fortune, from the north of England, and he has recently come to reach to Netherfield Park, has rented it. Okay, now this is about the story of two friends. Okay, now when they reach at Netherfield Park, what happened? The ball and Meriton and the Meriton Assembly. What happened? And in that ball, okay, earlier I had mentioned that the only purpose of Mrs. Bennet was to get her daughter's marriage. Okay, when Mr. Charles Bingley, okay, comes to Netherfield Park, okay, she was thinking that if she can, okay, marry her marry her daughters to him, it will be very fine for her. And Mr. Bingley, at the Meriton ball, what happened? Mr. Bingley and his two sisters, one brother-in-law, and Darcy, so total 5, and Mrs. Bennet and her daughters were present at the party. What happened at that Meriton ball, at the Meriton assembly, the ball and Meriton, Mr. Bingley, the family from Mr. Bingley and Darcy, they all met with Mrs. Bennet and her daughters at the party. Now what happened? What was the result of that party? And Darcy drew the attention of the room by his fine, tall person and handsome feature. So Darcy was very tall, is a tall person, he was very fine, and that's why he draws the attention of the other people in the room. Okay, but suddenly a news circulated that he is having 10,000 shares. So how rich person he is. So it was suddenly, okay, circulated in that room that he is having 10,000 a year. This news was circulated suddenly at the party. Okay, but at the end of the party, what was decided, that it was very shocking, that it was decided that Darcy was what, the proudest, the most reserved, most disagreeable man in the world, because he denies to dance with Elizabeth while he was speaking to Bingley. Elizabeth over here sits. Okay, when Elizabeth was standing there, Darcy was speaking to Bingley that he doesn't want to dance with Elizabeth, and Elizabeth overshares it. So that's why at the end of the party, it was decided, it was that Darcy was the proudest, the most agreeable man, the most reserved kind of man in the world. So this was about Darcy. Now what was about Charles Bingley? At the party, what happened? At the party, Bingley, he was what Charles Bingley, he was attracted towards Jane, the eldest daughter. He was attracted towards Jane. Party में क्या हुआ? Jane was attracted towards Jane and described her as the most beautiful creature. तो चार्ल्स बिंगले ने जेन को पार्टी में उसको द मोस्ट ब्यूटीफुल क्रीचर बोल के उसको डिस्क्राइब किया इन दिस वर्ल्ड. ओके, एंड डांस ट्वाइस, कितने टाइम? ट्वाइस, 2 बार. एंड फॉर्म्ड एन अटैचमेंट विद हर, उसके साथ एक अटैचमेंट क्रिएट हुआ. किसके साथ? चार्ल्स बिंगले के साथ, जेन के साथ. बट on the other hand, what happened? He described Elizabeth as a very pretty girl. Very pretty girl. He described Elizabeth as very pretty, and the most beautiful was Jane. And what was the reaction after the party of Mrs. Bennet? Now Mrs. Bennet quite detested, that is completely detested Darcy because of his haughtiness, because of his bad disposition and rudeness, and became very happy. On the other hand, Mrs. Bennet also became very happy because Bingley has danced with Jane twice. Okay, 2 बार जेन के साथ शादी किया, इसलिए she became very happy. On the other hand, she doesn't like Darcy's behavior because of Darcy's bad disposition, haughtiness, reserved kind of behavior, and rudeness. Okay, this was Mrs. Bennet's reaction after the party. Okay, now move to question. Now move to the next slide. Now, who was Bennet's neighbor? Okay, Bennet's neighbor, Mr. and Mrs. Bennet's neighbor and Elizabeth's best friend. Okay, Sir William Lucas was William, the Lucas family. They were the neighbor of Bennet, and this and that Charlotte Lucas was the eldest daughter of that family. Charlotte Lucas was the eldest, the oldest or the eldest daughter of that family, and who was very much attached to Elizabeth. Elizabeth's best friend was Charlotte Lucas, and who married to Mr. Collins. Yeah. So Elizabeth and Charlotte, after the party, what happened? Elizabeth, as I have mentioned, that Elizabeth and Charlotte are good friends. Now they are discussing what has happened in the party. Okay. Okay. Now Elizabeth and Charlotte discuss about Meryton ball, and Elizabeth continues to think Darcy as proud and reserved. So this is the prejudice. Okay, that on first impressions, Elizabeth is presuming Darcy as proud and reserved kind of person. So this is the prejudice of Elizabeth. That is the when one judging when one judge the folly of other people on first impressions. So Elizabeth and Charlotte discuss about the Meryton ball, and Elizabeth continues to think Darcy is proud and reserved kind of. On the other hand, Darcy mentions, so after a few days, what happened? Darcy mentions Darcy is now drawing gradually towards Elizabeth, drawing towards Elizabeth, and that's why Darcy was very much attracted by the fine eyes. Yeah, the fine eyes of Elizabeth. That's why Darcy is mentioning Elizabeth's fine eyes to Miss Bingley, that is to the sister of Charles Bingley, and that's why Miss Bingley is now teasing Darcy, and because she's jealous of Elizabeth. Okay, who teases him about wanting him to marry, and Darcy was gradually showing interest towards Elizabeth. धीरे 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 क्या होता? Darcy was gradually showing interest towards Elizabeth. Okay, but what happened when he was describing the fine eyes of Elizabeth? Miss Bingley was teasing him. Miss Bingley was teasing him because Miss Bingley was jealous of Elizabeth. Okay, and because of her low status. Now, what happened one day? Jane received an invitation to visit Netherfield Park. When the Bingleys were at Netherfield Park, they send a letter. Okay, they send a letter to Jane. They send a letter to Jane, and Jane received the letter, an invitation, and now Jane will visit Netherfield Park. What happened? Mrs. Bennet sent Jane on horseback rather than carriage. Even it was raining. Okay, even it was raining, Mrs. Bennet sent Jane on horseback, and her intention was that her intention was that Jane can spend the whole time there at Netherfield Park. That's why she sent Jane on horseback even it was raining. But what was the result? Jane falls ill from getting soaked while traveling, and Elizabeth, so that's why now Elizabeth क्या कर रहा है? Elizabeth विजिट कर रहा है नेदरफील्ड पार्क में उसका जो छोटा जेन को देखने के लिए, बड़ा बहन को देखने के लिए. Elizabeth now visits Netherfield Park to see for herself by walking 3 miles. Now Elizabeth walked 3 miles herself and in order to see the health of Jane. Yeah. Now but क्या हुआ? कुछ दिन के बाद जेन ठीक हो गया. When उसका जो when Jane feels better, they depart on Sunday. So when they depart on Sunday, 5 days after Jane's arrival at Netherfield. 5 दिन के बाद जेन एंड एलिजाबेथ ऑन संडे पे वो लोग नेदरफील्ड पार्क से निकले घर. कहाँ तक? कहाँ? लॉन्गबर्न में. Okay, now move to the next slide. Now William Collins. Okay, I had earlier mentioned that William Collins is the cousin of Mr. Bennet. Cousin of Mr. Bennet. Okay, cousin of Mr. Bennet, the inheritor of Mr. Bennet's Longbourn estate. Now, why is the inheritor? Because Mr. Bennet and Mrs. Bennet have no male child. Okay, as per the law the whole property should be will be inherited by a male figure, but they have no male child. That's why the cousin is the proper heir of the Longbourn estate. So who was the cousin? William Collins. One day what happened? William Collins visits Longbourn estate. One day, William Collins visits Longbourn Estates and visits the Longbourn Estate and decides to propose Elizabeth. And he decides that decides to propose Elizabeth. Elizabeth को propose करने को decide किया. But what happened when Elizabeth denies politely, okay, refuses politely the proposal of Mr. Collins. Everybody was shocked actually when they came to know that William Collins proposed Elizabeth. But Elizabeth denies very politely, refused very politely the proposal of William Collins. Suddenly, soon, what does he do? Soon, he turns his attention to Charles Lucas towards the best friend of whom? Towards the best friend of Elizabeth. Now, Charles Lucas. I have mentioned earlier that who is Charles Lucas is the eldest daughter of Lucas family, and who is a favorite friend of Elizabeth. And for her financial security she married to William Collins. But उसने क्या किया financial security के लिए Charles Lucas ने William Collins को, जो कि cousin of Mr. Bennet, उसको शादी किया. Okay, now move to the next slide. Now George Wickham and Elizabeth's conversation about Darcy. What happened? George Wickham is a militia officer, a lieutenant regiment, lieutenant of a regiment and militia officer, and Elizabeth conversation about Darcy. एक दिन क्या हुआ? George Wickham and William, they were talking about Darcy के बारे में बात कर रहा था. Now George Wickham, I mentioned that George Wickham is a militia officer, and but what happened? Elizabeth was first attracted towards him, okay. Because of his behavior, Elizabeth was first attracted towards George Wickham. But Elizabeth came to know when they were doing the conversation, okay, that Elizabeth came to know that Darcy and Wickham know each other. उसको पता चला कि Darcy and Wickham वो एक दूसरे को जानता है. Darcy and Wickham know each other. While dining at Meryton, Wickham ने क्या बोला डार्सी को? that Wickham ने एलिजाबेथ को क्या बोला? what he says to Elizabeth that Darcy's father, जो कि had left him a clergy का job in his will. in his will में clergy का job रख के गया था. Wickham explains is that after his father's death, Darcy did not honor that commitment, okay. डार्सी उस कमिटमेंट को ऑनर नहीं किया, रिस्पेक्ट नहीं किया. एंड एलिजाबेथ इज हॉरिफाइड बाय हिज एक्विजिशन and wants to expose Darcy. What Wickham says about Darcy, Elizabeth blindly believes all these things, and she wants to expose Darcy publicly, the behavior of Darcy. But Wickham denies it, tells Elizabeth not to do so. Okay, now move to the next slide. Bingley's invitation to Netherfield ball. Another ball is going to happen. That they have sent another invitation to Netherfield ball, where at the ball Elizabeth is disappointed to discover that Wickham is absent. तो एलिजाबेथ ने देखा कि उस नेदरफील्ड बॉल में विकहम नहीं है. she became very disappointed and blames, इसीलिए उसने किसको? डार्सी को ब्लेम कर रहा था. she was blaming Darcy for making him uncomfortable enough to avoid coming. So she's blaming that maybe the Darcy is responsible for not Darcy is responsible for Wickham's absence. Okay, now when Darcy asked her to dance with him, Elizabeth was so surprised and agreed to dance with him. What happened in that party? Suddenly Darcy asked Elizabeth to dance with him, and Elizabeth was very much surprised, but she finally agreed to dance with Darcy. Okay, now after the Netherfield ball, what happened? Netherfield ball has ended, and after the Netherfield ball, what happened? In the morning, Mr. Collins proposes Elizabeth and she refused politely. Now he proposes Charles Lucas and she accepts, and they married each other. I mentioned earlier that Mr. Collins, the cousin of Mr. Bennet, he proposes whom? He proposes first Elizabeth. When Elizabeth refuses it, he again proposes to Charles Lucas, the friend of Elizabeth, and Charles Lucas, for her financial security, she accepts the proposal and they married each other. Okay, now move to the next slide. Now what happened? One day, suddenly Bingley leaves for London, and Caroline's letter to Jane and what was Elizabeth reaction. क्या हुआ, एक दिन पता चला जेन को कि बिंगले लंदन वापस जा रहा है, एंड उसके बाद कुछ दिन के बाद कैरोलिन्स का लेटर आता है जेन के पास, एंड व्हाट वाज द रिएक्शन ऑफ एलिजाबेथ व्हेन बिंगले लीव्स फॉर लंदन. And Bingley leaves for London. Jane was very much depressed. Okay, Jane was very much depressed. Was disappointed. Okay, and when Caroline's letter came to Jane, okay, Bingley's have no plans. When Caroline's letter came to Jane, okay, when Jane received a letter from Caroline, okay, she came to know that where Caroline has written that Bingley's have no plans of ever returning to नेदरफील्ड, जहां पे कैरोलिन इस लेटर में लिखा है जो जेन को उसने भेजा था कि बिंगले फैमिली को अभी नेदरफील्ड में आने का कोई प्लान नहीं है. इसको पढ़ने के बाद क्या हुआ, व्हाट वाज द रिजल्ट ऑफ जेन, दैट इट लीव्स जेन डिप्रेस्ड बट एलिजाबेथ बिकेम वेरी एंग्री. बट जेन तो डिप्रेस्ड हो गया था, डिसअपॉइंटेड हो गया था, लेकिन क्या एलिजाबेथ जो था, एलिजाबेथ वेरी एंग्री, शी बिकेम वेरी एंग्री. व्हाई? एंड बिकॉज शी वाज थिंकिंग that the Darcy and the sisters of Mr. Bingley were responsible for the separation of Jane and Charles Bingley. She was blaming Bingley's sisters and Darcy for this. She was blaming Bingley's sister and Darcy for this. She was thinking that Darcy was responsible. Darcy and the sisters of Mr. Bingley were responsible for the separation of Mr. Bingley and the eldest daughter of Bennet family, that is Jane. Now Wickham continues to visit. Here what happened? On the other hand, Wickham continues to visit Elizabeth. George Wickham, the militia agent, the lieutenant of a regiment, who continues to visit Elizabeth in the Longbourn estate. Now what happened? One day, when Mr. and Mrs. Gardiner reach at Longbourn estate, they tell Jane to visit London. That's why Jane visits to London. Jane visits London with Mr. and Mrs. Gardiner. Okay. Unlike the other members of the society, Mr. and Mrs. Gardiner are very much close to the Bennet family. They are really good human being. Now Charles Lucas now marries William Collins and she invites. What happened? On the other hand, चार्लर लुकर्स जो कि विलियम कॉलिंस को काजिन ऑफ मिस्टर बेनेट को शादी किया था, चार्लर ने जो बेस्ट फ्रेंड ऑफ एलिजाबेथ को एलिजाबेथ को इनवाइट कर रहा था कहाँ पे जाने के लिए, हंट्सफोर्ड केंट पे. हंट्सफोर्ड, तो अभी शादी होने के बाद चार्लर लुकर्स कहाँ पे गया, हंट्सफोर्ड केंट पे गया है, तो उधर पे एलिजाबेथ को इनवाइट कर रहे हैं विजिट करने के लिए. सो चार्लर लुकास इज नाउ इनवाइटिंग एलिजाबेथ टू विजिट हंट्सफोर्ड केंट. एंड जेन तो अभी चला गया, कहाँ पे चला गया, मिस्टर एंड मिसेस गार्डिनर का घर में जो लंदन में चला गया. और उसके बाद चार्लर लुकास ने किसको इनवाइट कर रहा है, उसका फ्रेंड जो है एलिजाबेथ को इनवाइट कर रहा है कहाँ जाने के लिए, हंट्सफोर्ड केंट पे. ओके, नाउ इसीलिए उस एलिजाबेथ में क्या एलिजाबेथ एक्सेप्ट्स द इनविटेशन एंड शी विजिट्स टू हंट्सफोर्ड, दैट इज एट केंट. हंट्सफोर्ड किसके साथ गया, चार्लर लुकास का जो छोटा जो बहन है, दैट इज मारिया, इज द यंगेस्ट सिस्टर ऑफ चार्लर लुकास, दैट इज मारिया, एंड उसका पिताजी चार्लट्स फादर के साथ एलिजाबेथ गया. बट ऑन देयर वे टू हंट्सफोर्ड जाने के बीच में दे स्टॉप्ड एट मिस्टर एंड मिसेस गार्डिनर्स होम पे. मिस्टर एंड मिसेस गार्डिनर होम पे रुका है, जो कि टू स्पेंड द नाइट, रात बिताने के लिए उधर पे रुका है. एंड फाइनली रीच द डेस्टिनेशन वेयर दे मीट लेडी कैथरीन डिब्रो. एंड हु वाज लेडी कैथरीन डिब्रो? लेडी कैथरीन डिब्रो वाज द aunt of डर्सी. जहां पे पहुंचने के बाद कहां पे पहुंचा वो लोग, हंट्सफोर्ड केंट में पहुंचने के बाद उधर पे वो लोग को किसके साथ मिला, दे मीट लेडी कैथरीन डिब्रो, जो कि ऑलवेज क्या करता है, दूसरे का ऑलवेज इंटरफेयर इन अदर्स पीपल लाइफ, दूसरे का लाइफ में ऑलवेज इंटरफेयर करता है. एंड दे आर इनवाइटेड टू रोजिंग, एंड रोजिंग इज हियर, दैट इज रोजिंग इज द एंड लेडी कैथरीन डिब्रो इज द ओनर ऑफ द स्टेट दैट रोजिंग. सो व्हाट, लेडी कैथरीन डी का नाम क्या है, रोजिंग. या रोजिंग इज द स्टेट, द ओनर ऑफ, who is the owner of the owner of the estate Rosing, that is Lady Catherine de Bourgh. And Lady Catherine de Bourgh is the aunt of Darcy. When Darcy listens this, that Elizabeth has recently reached to Huntsford Kent, Darcy visits and then Darcy visits his aunt Lady Catherine de Bourgh at Rosings and he and so Darcy भी क्या हुआ, लेडी कैथरीन डी उसका आंट का घर में दैट इज रोजिंग में विजिट किया and he one day surprisingly proposes एलिजाबेथ बिकॉज एलिजाबेथ को उधर पे रोजिंग्स में जाने के लिए एलिजाबेथ को भी इनविटेशन मिला था, एलिजाबेथ उधर पे गया, सब एलिजाबेथ उधर पे गया, डार्सी भी उधर पे पहुंचा, तो क्या हुआ सडनली आफ्टर फ्यू डेज सडनली what happened that Darcy proposes Elizabeth but Elizabeth refused for that time because तभी भी at still that time that she thinks that okay तब भी वो सोच रहा था कि Darcy is responsible for the separation of Bingley and Jane का सेपरेशन जो हुआ डार्सी ही उसके लिए रिस्पॉन्सिबल है, इसीलिए when Darcy for that reason when Darcy proposes Elizabeth at Rosings she doesn't accept the proposal of Darcy and even for his mistreatment of Wickham, दो reason कि Darcy was responsible for the separation of Bingley and Jane and for his mistreatment or misbehavior or disposition of Wickham. But what happened when Elizabeth denies the proposal on the next day, but the next day Darcy gave a letter. Darcy किसको एक लेटर दिया, एलिजाबेथ को एक लेटर दिया जहां पे उसने स्टेट किया टू हर वेयर ही स्टेट्स दैट द ट्रूथ बिहाइंड हिज एक्शंस. Okay, now first explanation he gave two explanation. First explanation is that regarding the Jane and Bingley matter. Regarding Jane and Bingley matter में क्या बोला, he admits that he wanted to save Bingley को वो सेव करने चाह रहा था from an imprudent marriage, but he stresses that he felt that Jane's feelings were not deeply involved because of her calm nature. He says that it was not very much visible to everyone that whether Jane loves Bingley because Jane was very calm in nature and that never displayed any indication of strong attachment towards Bingley. She says that okay that Jane has no strong indication, strong attachment towards Bingley. That's why he wanted to save Bingley from an imprudent marriage. Okay, that's why. And he gave the second explanation that he didn't deprive Wickham. क्या बोल रहा है कि he didn't deprive Wickham, उसको डिप्राइव नहीं किया विकेम को ऑफ दैट क्लर्जीमैन पोजीशन विदाउट कंपेंसेशन. इंस्टीट्यूट उसने क्या दिया 3000 पाउंड्स टू स्टडी, लॉ पढ़ने के लिए उसको 3000 पाउंड्स पैसा भी उसको वो दिया था. ओके 3000 पाउंड्स पैसा भी उसने उसको दिया था. ठीक है. देन okay, let's do that. It is problem. Okay, and this is how he gave two explanations on their way. But by sending this letter, okay, Darcy and Colonel Fitzwilliam, the cousin, they leave Hunsford day after Darcy arrives. Darcy gives the letter. Okay, day after Darcy gives the letter, they leave Hunsford. So when here on their way back to London, it means that when Elizabeth was Elizabeth on their way back to Longbourn, Elizabeth again stops at Mr. and Mrs. Gardiner and Jane also returns home with them. Earlier I have mentioned that Jane was at the home of Mr. and Mrs. Gardiner when Elizabeth along with Maria and Charles Lucas sisters Maria and father when they were returning from Hunsford, Elizabeth stops at again Mr. and Mrs. Gardiner उसका घर पे जहाँ पे जेन रह रहा था और सब एक साथ में वापस घर लौट आया. अब जब घर लौट आने के बाद एक दिन क्या आया कि मिस्टर एंड मिसेस गार्डनर इनवाइट्स एलिजाबेथ को कहाँ पे डार्बीशायर जाने के लिए ट्रिप करने के लिए इनविटेशन हुआ और उसने एक्सेप्ट किया और उसने उधर गया. एंड लेडियास एलोपमेंट व्हाट हैपेंड, जब एलिजाबेथ को मिस्टर एंड मिसेस गार्डनर से एक इनविटेशन मिला कि कहाँ पे जाने के लिए डार्बीशायर जाने के लिए ट्रिप में, तो एलिजाबेथ भी निकल पड़ा. अब विथ मिस्टर एंड मिसेस गार्डनर शी विजिट्स डार्सी एस्टेट्स. सब तो क्या हुआ लंदन से जो कि मिस्टर एंड मिसेस गार्डिनर्स घर से वो लोग कहाँ घूमने गया, डार्बी शहर में। डार्बी शहर में जाने के बाद वो लोग कहाँ विजिट किए, सी विजिट्स डार्सी स्टेट ना, व्हाट वाज द नेम ऑफ द डार्सी स्टेट, दैट इज पेम्बरली, एंड डार्सी इनवाइट्स देम फॉर डिनर। तब उसके बाद सडनली डार्सी के साथ उन लोग को मीट हुआ, दे मेट विथ, suddenly Darcy met Elizabeth, and Darcy invites them for dinner. Darcy invites them for dinner, and Darcy is still in love with Elizabeth, and Elizabeth begins to have similar feelings for him. Darcy अभी भी एलिजाबेथ को लव करता है, प्यार करता है अभी, बट धीरे धीरे क्या ग्रेजुअली क्या हो रहा है कि एलिजाबेथ begins to have similar feelings for Darcy. Later she receives two letters from Jane. One day, what happened when she was spending quality time there, when Elizabeth was spending a quality time there, okay, she receives two letters from Jane, where Jane was stating, Jane क्या बोल रहा था कि Lydia has eloped with Wickham. Lydia जो कि the youngest daughter था, वो Wickham the militia agent, the militia officer, उसके साथ भाग गया। तो उसके लिए एलिजाबेथ वॉज वेरी मच, उस सुनने के बाद, पढ़ने के बाद एलिजाबेथ क्या हुआ, एलिजाबेथ वॉज सेटर्ड, Elizabeth became very exhausted, very upset, because for her it was a kind of disgrace, okay, because it was for her, it was a kind of disgrace to her family, and और ये तो एक फैमिली के लिए एक डिसग्रेस था, और एक रीजन क्या वो दिखा रहा है कि और एक रीजन क्या दिखा रहा है, that her newly discovered love for Darcy is hopeless. वो बोल रहा है कि जो न्यूली डिस्कवर्ड लव फॉर डार्सी अभी उसको लग रहा है कि ये होपलेस है, मतलब ये फ्रूटफुल नहीं होगा, क्योंकि उसका फैमिली का एक जो रेस्पेक्ट वो तो खत्म हो गया इधर पे, इसीलिए। बट लेटर इट was revealed that Darcy was the person who found Lydia in Wickham, and he paid all of Wickham's debts, जितना डेब्ट उधार था सब कुछ उसने दिया है। कौन दिया है, डार्सी ने दिया, एंड बॉड हिम, उसके लिए कमीशन भी इन द आर्मी, जगह भी बना उसको, उसके लिए खरीद के दिया उसको, एंड परसुएडेड हिम टू मैरी, शादी करने के लिए उसको परसुएड भी किया था। ओके इसको सुनने के बाद, आफ्टर हियरिंग दिस थिंग, ओके, आफ्टर लिसनिंग ऑल दिस थिंग्स, ओके, एलिजाबेथ्स हार्ट्स बिगिन टू चेंज, एंड एलिजाबेथ्स हार्ट begins to change, okay, and that's why the happy union starts, the happy union, okay, that is Bingley's return to Netherfield. What happened, one day क्या हुआ, Bingley एक दिन नेदरफील्ड पार्क में वापस लौट आया, and he again proposes Jane, and Jane became very happy, very satisfied, and she accepts the proposal of Mr. Bingley. So this is how the first union of Bingley and Jane happened. Now come but what happened when the Lady Catherine de Bourgh, the aunt of Darcy, and she suddenly has listened to the rumored engagement of Darcy and Elizabeth. तो वो क्या किया, सडनली उसने क्या किया, विजिट किया, सडन विजिट ऑफ लेडी कैथरीन डी बोर्ग टू लॉन्गबर्न, एज शी हैज हर्ड द रूमर्ड एंगेजमेंट ऑफ डार्सी एंड एलिजाबेथ। उसने क्या सुना, उसको पता चला कि शायद जो कि डार्सी एंड एलिजाबेथ के साथ क्या हुआ, एंगेजमेंट हो गया, इसलिए उसने एलिजाबेथ के साथ बात करने के लिए लॉन्गबर्न स्टेट आ गया, एंड वांट्स टू स्टॉप इट, क्योंकि उसका जो जिंदगी में क्या काम था कि दूसरे का लाइफ में इंटरफेयर करना, इसीलिए she wanted to stop the relationship, the engagement, okay, but Elizabeth refuses to accept Lady Catherine's demand, and not to accept Darcy's proposal, okay. So what was Lady Catherine de Bourgh demanding? Lady Catherine de Bourgh is demanding Elizabeth to not to accept Darcy's proposal, but Elizabeth उसको refuse किया, okay. Now Darcy, what happened then, Darcy again comes to Longbourn with Bingley. What happened, one day again डार्सी लॉन्गबर्न में आया, बिंगले को साथ में लेके लॉन्गबर्न में आया, जहां पे डार्सी क्या किया, अगेन एलिजाबेथ को प्रपोज किया, एंड शी एक्सेप्ट्स हैप्पीली द प्रपोजल ऑफ डार्सी. दिस इज हाउ द रीयूनियन, द हैप्पी यूनियन also takes place between Darcy and Elizabeth. So the dichotomy between Pride and Prejudice, जो प्राइड एंड प्रेजुडिस के बीच में जो डिकोटोमी चल रहा था, जो द्वंद्व चल रहा था, वो क्या हुआ, इट रिजल्ट्स इन हैप्पी यूनियन ऑफ लाफ, हैप्पी यूनियन लाफ के ऐसे ही उसका एंड हुआ, खत्म हुआ, जबकि मिसअंडरस्टैंडिंग खत्म होने के बाद बिटवीन द टू, व्हेन देयर मिसअंडरस्टैंडिंग्स डिसअपियर, मिसअंडरस्टैंडिंग जब डिसअपियर हुआ, तब जाके जो डिकोटोमी बिटवीन प्राइड एंड प्रेजुडिस था, वो हैप्पी यूनियन that results in a happy union of love, शादी हुआ, okay. Now let's move to the last slide here. let's zoom it here. Yeah, Sir Walter Scott praised Jane Austen. Sir Walter Scott, yeah, praised Jane Austen for that exquisite touch, for that exquisite touch, which provides ordinary commonplace things and characters interesting. ऑर्डिनरी कॉमनप्लेस थिंग्स एंड कैरेक्टर्स को इंटरेस्टिंग बनाता है कौन? जेन ऑस्टेन. एंड फॉर दैट एक्सक्विजिट टच सर वॉल्टर स्कॉट ने जेन ऑस्टेन को प्रेज किया फॉर दिस नॉवेल. नाउ व्हाइल Somerset mom claimed that she had at her command the most precious gift our novelist can possess, that of keeping the reader's interests. Okay. And okay, so this was the comment made on Jane Austen's work Pride and Prejudice. uh, okay, thank you once again for watching this video. Please do subscribe SAHOO's tutorial, and for PDF please join my Telegram channel, that is Santu SAHOO. This is the name of the Telegram channel, and please subscribe my YouTube channel, that is SAHOO's tutorial. Okay, thank you. Have a nice day.